Most fans of FromSoft games became fans because of Dark Souls, Sekiro, and most recently Elden Ring. We all know these games have a little bit more of a difficulty curve, and we all had to learn to get good at some point. But what about Armored Core? Since the announcement of Armored Core 6, many FromSoft fans have been going back and trying old Armored Core games. But for those newer fans who haven't had the chance to play the older games and only know FromSoft for their difficult games like Soulsborne series and Sekiro, what actually makes Armored Core so difficult? In this video, I want to discuss a few factors about Armored Core that makes the series difficult in ways that are different from Dark Souls. The first reason on this list is probably the cause for most of the difficulty you will experience in Armored Core, and that's the higher actions per minute and control setup. Armored Core is just a much faster paced game than something like Elden Ring or Dark Souls. We are piloting highly advanced war machines, and the movement in the game really makes you feel like it. There are 4 different movement controls just for boosting that could take some time getting used to. In addition, you will have 4 weapons available at the same time, which is also independently fired with L1, L2, R1, and R2, or the Xbox equivalent. And on top of all of that, you have to be aware of your current ammo for your equipped weapons and when you have to reload, in addition to your current energy status, so you know how much boosting you can do. This is shown on the UI, of course, but it just means that there's a lot to keep track of while trying to perform all these different actions. And in moments of high intensity, it kind of creates a sense of like choice paralysis. And very quickly for the control setup, you may have seen the meme about the Armored Core way of handling or holding your controllers. It just, like, the way that it's set up is just a little bit wonky, and how, like, you're limited in any choice of button setup that you do. Like, if you choose to map your buttons in ways that are friendly for boosting, it's going to make firing weapons a little bit more difficult. But if you choose to have your buttons mapped to enable weapon firing a little bit easier, then it makes boosting a little bit awkward. So don't expect to be comfortable with the controls immediately, I would say. For this next item, I want to expand a little bit more on the movement in Armored Core. And I already touched on it briefly in regards to controls in the high APM, but Armored Core has just a lot of movement, like controls that you have to keep track of and press at like the right times and stuff like that. There are 4 different boosting aspects that you have to manage, from standard boosting, vertical boosting, quick boosting, and finally assault boosting. You will likely have times where you must toggle boost on and off, not only to conserve energy, but to also help descend and evade fire in the case of vertical boosting. Quick boosting is the most like dodging in a Souls game, where you spam this quickly to evade attacks. Finally, assault boosting can be used both offensively and defensively, but will rapidly consume your energy reserve, so this should be used carefully. Trying to better manage your boost against an enemy who is constantly trying to get behind you is what kind of introduces that feeling of choice paralysis, and you have to figure out when is the best times to actually use these different boost mechanics, and it's just very hard to stay on target when you're facing a fast enemy and trying to control your movement. While there are 4 different types of boosts, none of them provide iframes or invulnerability like a Souls game. This causes the next item on this list to be a bit of an issue, and that's the fact that the game acts like a little bit of a bullet hell sometimes, and you'll be faced with different types of enemies firing at you from all different directions with guided missiles and maybe large laser beams. The fact there are no iframes means that you have to be pretty precise with your quick boost to evade fire. And I will say one of the cool things about the lack of iframes is how it kind of makes the environment feel more meaningful and impactful. There will be times when you're surrounded by multiple enemies from various directions, and you will have to kind of think about how to use the line of sight to protect you from your blind spots. Finally, I will say, because of this bullet hell gameplay at times and the lack of iframes, expect to take damage, which leads me into my next item. You have less room for error when it comes to taking big hits. In something like Elden Ring, you can get a pretty good stock of healing charges from your Estus. However, in Armored Core 6, you will only have 3 healing charges, and this is already an improvement from previous iterations or entries into the series where you just didn't have healing at all. I believe there is an enhancement which increases how much your repair kits heal for, but still you won't be able to just chug Estus like you could in Souls games by backing off from a boss. This means the damage you take, even from smaller enemies, could be extremely important and detrimental to the mission. If it's not apparent already, movement is very important in Armored Core, and the last 3 items on this list have all compounded off of each other to make a difficult experience. Having bad movement means the rain of bullets will deal more damage to you, and taking more damage while having less chances to heal means your mission experience can be pretty difficult. In addition, if your goal is to S-rank missions, you must minimize the damage you take. But let's switch gears a little bit here and look at the boss fights themselves. Bosses in Armored Core can be rather insane. Some of the most difficult fights are usually because the pilot has a mech with some insane movement that makes them very difficult to track. One example I can think of is a fight in Armored Core 4 Answer where you fight an enemy named Fragile, which is a cyborg or AI pilot, and this mech that it's piloting is possibly the fastest mech in the entire series, and it can be an absolute nightmare to try to keep a lock on this enemy. There are ways to cheese this Fragile fight, but if you try to ever face him like up front and just like in a one-on-one duel without any kind of cheese tactics, this fight was very hard. In addition, there's the infamous 9-ball fight, which could be attributed to the clunky controls back then, but again, this enemy was just very hard to track. The movement of these ACs isn't the only thing challenging about them. These fights usually take place inside the arena, which means that you won't have access to any healing of any kind. The earlier fights are quite easy, where you might just fight a basic AC with a rifle and that's it, but as you climb the arena ladder, you'll face off against enemies with advanced technology. Take the AC Noblesse Oblige for example. Taking a couple hits from his winged laser cannons can quickly send you back to the garage to try the fight again. In these later fights, you will have to be good about your movement and the ability to track enemies, all while constantly evading attacks. But when a fight proves to be too difficult, it might be by design, which leads me to the last item on this list. Armored Core is going to force you to change your mech build. You can ultimately brute force any mission with any build, but some fights are just going to be insanely difficult without making changes. This is already a little bit of a different vibe than the Souls series, because in Dark Souls or Elden Ring, you're kind of encouraged to just stick with one singular build for the entire game. Armored Core encourages you to try out different builds. It's kind of the whole purpose of the game. But trying out different builds kind of introduces a little bit of a different challenge in a sense. So if you feel the need to switch up your build to something a little bit more favorable in a mission, this may be a different playstyle that you're a little unfamiliar with, which can also add to the difficulty and learning curve of Armored Core. Either way, Armored Core's combat will force you into a bit of a corner. Let's take Armored Core 6 for example, and assume you really like running tank treads, which are a more grounded based leg type. Your build is finely tuned for carrying the weight of heavy weapons. But you're dealing with a boss who primarily deals grounded based attacks and is proving difficult to evade. You can continue with your tank build, or you can try swapping to a leg type that allows for more aerial based combat. But because you swapped your legs, you are now no longer able to carry those heavy weapons that you were previously, which means you can't exactly play the same bursty playstyle as you were before. So now you're forced into using a little bit lighter weapons, but you're actually able to stay in the air longer and evade some of the attacks. So you're kind of able to counter the boss in a sense, but your build, you might not just be as familiar with it. In both scenarios, you're going to have to make an adjustment to how you play, and there are a lot of instances like this in Armored Core that will make you choose on how you want to tackle a boss. But that's going to be it for this list. If any of you have played Armored Core in the past, let me know what you find difficult about the game in the comments. I think learning the controls can be pretty complicated, but even after learning those controls, mastering them is truly difficult. As a result, I think that this makes Armored Core have a bit of a high skill floor and a high skill ceiling in my opinion. If you want to join a community of like-minded people, make sure to check out my Discord channel where I will be holding different community events, having giveaways, and just holding discussions about all things Armored Core. But this is GooberTroy saying thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.